A sitting U.S. president in his second term should not be stuck at 36% approval. Not this early, not with his party unified, and not without a recession. Yet that's exactly where Donald Trump's approval rating landed and stayed. This isn't about scandals, personality, or media bias anymore. This is about something voters feel in their wallets, their jobs, and their long-term confidence. Economic whiplash. Trump's approval numbers aren't collapsing, but they're not recovering either. And that flatline tells us more than a dramatic drop ever could. Because what Americans are reacting to right now isn't ideology, it's uncertainty. Poll after poll shows the same pattern. Trump's base remains solid, but the outer ring of voters, independents, business owners, middle-income households, are uneasy. Not angry, not panicked, just unsure. And uncertainty is toxic for an incumbent. Gallup's tracker shows Trump dipping to 36% approval late last year, the lowest point of his second term. Other major polls hover slightly higher, around 40%, but the trend is the same. No rebound, no momentum, just stagnation. That matters because second-term presidents usually stabilize once campaigns end. The noise fades, governance begins, and voters reassess. That recalibration never happened. Instead, approval ratings hardened early and then quietly eroded. Why? Because economic policy stopped feeling directional. Take tariffs. They're announced as sweeping and permanent, then delayed, then partially reversed, then challenged in court, then hinted at again. Businesses aren't debating whether tariffs are good or bad. They're asking whether they'll still exist 6 months from now. Manufacturers can't expand if cost structures might change overnight. Importers can't price products if exemptions appear and disappear. Investors don't hedge against ideology. They hedge against unpredictability. The same story plays out with the Federal Reserve. Trump has always clashed with the Fed, but in this term the pressure is louder and more explicit. Public demands for rate cuts. Signals about reshaping the Fed's leadership. Speculation about loyalty tests rather than independence. To supporters, that sounds like accountability. To markets, it sounds like instability. The Fed's power doesn't come from being right every time. It comes from being insulated from politics. Once that insulation looks thinner, the dollar reacts. Not dramatically, but noticeably. A softer dollar raises import costs, fuels inflation anxiety, and makes global investors cautious. Again, not a crash, a hesitation. And hesitation is the theme of this presidency so far. Trump still brands himself as pro-business, but the messaging has become contradictory. Defense contractors are warned against buybacks. Manufacturers are pushed toward domestic production regardless of efficiency. Financial institutions are reminded, implicitly, that political alignment has consequences. Nothing captured that tension more clearly than Trump's lawsuit against J.P. Chase and its CEO, Jamie Dimon. A sitting president suing the largest U.S. bank for $5 billion over alleged political debanking sends a message, whether intentional or not, that economic power and political power are now colliding directly. Supporters see it as fighting back against elite institutions. Critics see it as personalizing economic enforcement. Markets see one thing: unpredictability. When banks fear political retaliation, they become cautious. When corporations can't predict regulatory posture, they slow investment. When capital slows, confidence erodes, quietly, steadily, and invisibly. That erosion shows up first in approval ratings. APNORC polling shows Americans don't think the economy is collapsing, but they don't feel secure either. Many say Trump's priorities are unclear. Others say policies feel reactive rather than planned. That's a dangerous place for a president to be. Anger energizes voters. Fear mobilizes them. Uncertainty disengages them. Trump's approval rating isn't low because Americans hate what he's doing. It's low because too many Americans don't know what he's going to do next. One week it's economic nationalism. The next week it's carve-outs and reversals. One week it's Fed pressure. The next it's institutional reshuffling. One week it's pro-business rhetoric. The next it's lawsuits and warnings. That's not chaos, it's whiplash. And whiplash doesn't dominate headlines. It corrodes trust. This is why Trump's approval has a strong floor but a low ceiling. His supporters remain loyal, but confidence among persuadable voters is weakening. Not dramatically, structurally. That distinction matters. Because structural erosion doesn't reverse with a single speech, a single win, or a single enemy. It only reverses when people believe the direction is clear again. Americans can tolerate tough policy. They can tolerate aggressive trade wars. They can even tolerate short-term pain. What they struggle with is not knowing where the road leads. Right now, too many voters feel like the road keeps changing. Because in politics, momentum doesn't just disappear. It gets replaced. And when momentum shifts away from a president, something subtle but powerful happens. The conversation stops being about what he wants to do and starts becoming about what might happen to him, electorally, institutionally, historically. That shift is already underway. You can see it in how lawmakers talk. Fewer bold promises, more hedging language, more "let's see how this plays out." When confidence is high, allies move fast. When confidence wavers, they protect themselves first. You can see it in corporate behavior too. Companies don't make headlines when they pull back. They don't announce canceled investments. They delay hiring. They freeze expansion. They keep cash on the sidelines. None of that shows up immediately in unemployment numbers, but it shows up in sentiment, and sentiment drives politics long before data confirms it. This is where Trump's second term faces its real test. Not from protests, not from investigations, but from hesitation. The economic story Americans tell themselves matters more than quarterly statistics. Right now, that story is muddled. People hear tough talk about rebuilding American industry, but they also see prices fluctuate. They hear promises of strength, but also watch legal battles blur the line between governance and personal grievance. That contradiction doesn't outrage voters, it confuses them. And confusion drains energy. Midterms are decided by energy, not by approval ratings alone, but by who feels motivated, who feels confident, and who feels like the future is predictable enough to invest their vote in. A stalled presidency doesn't inspire turnout. It inspires caution. Republicans in swing districts already feel it. When economic policy feels volatile, local races become defensive. Candidates stop running on bold alignment and start running on independence. That's how presidential momentum fractures into localized survival strategies. Democrats, meanwhile, don't need a wave. They just need gravity to do its job. When the White House doesn't project clarity, opposition doesn't need a single unifying message. It just needs to let doubts compound. That's the danger of economic whiplash. It doesn't create one big backlash moment. It creates 1,000 small reasons for disengagement. And disengagement always favors the challenger. Trump understands momentum better than almost anyone in modern politics. His rise was built on sensing when institutions felt stale and voters felt ignored. But governing requires a different kind of instinct. It requires knowing when volatility energizes and when it exhausts. Right now, volatility is exhausting. If the administration recalibrates, stabilizes trade policy, clarifies its relationship with the Federal Reserve, draws a cleaner line between political grievance and economic governance, momentum can shift back. Floors can become launchpads. Approval ceilings can rise.